Well, hi, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another edition of Unstoppable Mindset. And today we are going to chat with Pat Backley. Pat is a British woman, as she will tell you, but at the age of 59, which has now been what, 13 years ago, she decided to become a Kiwi and move to New Zealand. We'll have to find out what brought that about. I've been to New Zealand. It's a fun place. I'd love to go back. But anyway, and of late, certainly much later in her life, Pat decided to become an author. She wrote her first book at the age of 70, and that is another fascinating story, I am sure. So we will delve into all of that, and we're going to grill Pat until she's tired of us. Pat, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you so much, Michael. I can assure you I won't be tired of being grilled by you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're really glad that you're here. What time is it in New Zealand right now?
It's 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's about what I thought.
Mhm.
So you're 21 hours ahead of us, and
Yes,
and
and I have to say that tomorrow is looking very good. You'll be glad to know.
oh, good. Well, then it should be good. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's going to look good, and it's actually going to warm up a little bit here. We're only getting up to about 65 Fahrenheit, so that's what, about 17 Celsius or so. But um, tomorrow it's supposed to start getting a little bit warmer. We're approaching our winter as you approach your summer, which is kind of
Mm.
interesting.
Yes, very interesting. When I first moved to New Zealand, that was one of the things I found very strange to have Christmas in the sunshine, because obviously I was born with Christmas in the cold
Right,
weather. So like
right.
you, yeah.
Well, and you could have moved to Australia where they use kangaroos to pull Santa's sleigh.
I could have done, but Australia didn't have the same appeal for me as New Zealand.
No, I like New Zealand. I haven't been to Australia. I'd like to go, but I really enjoyed being in New Zealand. I've been to both the North and the South Island. I spent almost 3 weeks there back in 2003 and gave something like um, 17 or 18 speaking opportunities in 15 days. And I only
Wow.
had one day that I had mostly off, and that we spent. What is the town on the South Island, the tourist town?
Oh, Queenstown.
Queenstown, yeah. And so, but that only lasted until about 6 that evening, and then I had to go off and speak again. But it was a lot of fun.
You must have been exhausted because there's quite
No,
a lot quite a lot of distance. What I'm about to say is going to sound ridiculous now because I've just been to America and I know about your distances. I was going to say, because you have a lot of driving distance between the towns you would have had to speak at. But then as I was about to verbalize it, I thought, Pat, that's stupid. In America, the distances are far greater.
well, and also a number of airplane flights between the North and the South Island to make it go faster as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So it was fun. Well, why don't we start by you telling us a little bit kind of about the early Pat, growing up and all that. We'll start with that.
Okay. Well, I was born in 1951, so it was just after the war, and England was still suffering from the effects of the war. You know, there was a lot of it was a bit of a grey place. So my parents couldn't afford to buy their own home, so I lived with my paternal grandparents for the first 3.5 years of my life. And of course, I had a lovely time because I had four adults doting on me. Then we moved out to the country. We were given a council house, which is like a state house. I'm not sure what they're called in America, you know, where the government provides them.
Right.
Which at that time was very acceptable because there wasn't much housing because it had all been bombed out, because we lived in London. So I grew up in the country. I didn't realize we were poor until I was 11 and went to secondary school. And suddenly because I was quite bright, I was put in a grammar stream class. So I was suddenly with all these rich kids one girl was driven to school in a chauffeur-driven Rolls Royce, and I lived in the little government house opposite the school, so everyone knew I was poor. So yeah, it was tough. I would say it was tough my teenage years, but
Did
I
did they
survived.
teach you? Did they tease you a lot about that?
Oh yeah, I got.
Uh-huh.
I mean, these days they would call it bullying.
Bullying, right?
It was just what my luck, that I remember one time, and I actually did write about this in my memoirs because it's still in my head after 60 odd years. One time I was the only kid in the class that went home for school lunches.
Mm,
And one because mum couldn't afford to pay for school lunches. So
right.
I used to go home because we lived just opposite. And I remember one day I came back to school and it was raining. So all the kids were back in the classroom early and the teacher wasn't there yet. And there was this one girl whose name will live in my memory forever. She's etched on my soul, Angela Barrett. And she was standing at the front of the class pretending to be the teacher, writing on the blackboard and then wiping it off with this black cloth. And then she said, "This is all this rag is fit for." And it was actually my school raincoat, which
Mm,
until then I'd been very proud of, but it was secondhand, it'd be my cousin's. And I can remember that afternoon thinking, I don't want to be here anymore. I hate it here. Everyone hates me. And I went home and I told mum and I cried. And she said, "Look, love, just because they've got more money than you doesn't make them any better people." And at 11, I could not see that at all like that. I just thought, why don't you just get more money? Why don't you buy me a nice raincoat? Blah, blah, blah. But now in hindsight, I just think that was the wisest thing she could say because
hmm.
of the time I rebelled, it made me realize that actually it's not an equal playing field in the world. You're going to have people that are on this side and down at the bottom and up at the top, and you just have to grit your teeth and fight your way through it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the reality is there are only so many things that you can truly control. And
uh,
what you can control is how you dealt with that situation and
yes.
situations like that.
Yes, that's right. And then I was definitely a product of the 60s. We had all the lovely pop music and the short skirts and burning our bras and all that sort of stuff. But when I was just 2 weeks after my 20th birthday, I got married for the first time, which was ridiculous in hindsight. But at the time, you think you know everything when you're that age, don't you? My parents begged me not to marry him, but of course I knew best. So that marriage lasted 14 years and he wasn't always very kind. So then I left. Then I was on my own for a bit. Then I had a live-in boyfriend and I was desperate to have a child, Michael. But I'm old-fashioned. I only would have a child if I had a husband. And so I didn't, I got married again when I was 41 and we had a child. I had a child when I was 43, my daughter. And that was that. And I thought life was going to be great. And then 26 years later, he decided he didn't love me anymore, didn't want to live in New Zealand anymore, and that was that. So, so I kind of found myself living in New Zealand on my own, having we emigrated here together just before my 59th birthday. But anyway, I've picked up the pieces. It's been 6 years now, and because of COVID and because of him leaving me, that's how my life changed, really.
Mm. And your
Sorry,
daughter, and your
and
daughter.
my beloved daughter, my only child. Yes, she's 30 now, and she is the love of my life. Yes. And I'm sorry, I've just realized I probably haven't answered your question very well.
No,
You
you've
must
done fine.
always pull me back because I tend to get very excited and passionate and, don't necessarily toe the line with question answering. So forgive me.
Not a problem. That's why this is a conversation and not a big deal. So, is your daughter in New Zealand?
She is now. When her dad, she was 16 when we came to New Zealand. So she did her last bit of school here. Then she went to university in Auckland. And then she decided she wanted to do her master's degree back in London. So she went back to London and then she got a job there. And she was away for 5.5 years, which nearly broke my heart.
Mm.
Um, but she's home now. She's been back 4 years and she's got a lovely Kiwi boyfriend and she's here to stay. So I'm thrilled.
What did she get her degree in?
Art history.
Ah, now,
Yeah.
did you go to college?
No, sadly,
You did not.
because we were poor, I just
Yeah.
had to leave school at 16, and so no, I never went to college. I would have loved to. I would have liked to have been a teacher, but it wasn't to be, and I've had a great life regardless of that.
So did you, during all your married life and then the time in between and so on, what kind of work did you do?
Well, I started work in the bank. When I was 16, Barclays Bank was a really good place to work. So I spent 10 years working there. Then I lived for 2 years in the Fiji Islands and just did voluntary work. Back to the UK. My first husband and I started a furniture business. And then when I left him, obviously I needed a job because I didn't claim anything in the divorce. And so I got a job with Barnardo's, the children's charity, as a general fundraiser. And that was great because I just travelled all around the south of England supporting all the fundraising groups and things, which I loved. And then after a few years, I moved on to cancer research. Again as a fundraiser, but this time setting up all their charity shops in the south. And that was a wonderful thing as well, because during the course of both those jobs, I met so many interesting people. Now that I'm an old grey haired lady, well,
Yeah.
not actually grey because I colour it, but now that I'm an old grey haired lady, I feel very bad that the 35-year-old me went to my new job with Bernardo's and sat there looking at these hundreds of grey-haired old ladies. And I thought, oh, I'm too young to deal with all these old people. What on earth am I going to talk to them about? And of course, within a couple of days, I realised that all these grey-haired old people were fabulous, that most of them had had really interesting, fascinating lives, and that I could learn an awful lot from them. So now the old grey-haired me looks back and feels very guilty at how I was at that age. But I guess that's what happens. When you're young, you just think anyone over the age of 50 is past it, don't you, really?
Well,
Um,
but you did learn a lot, I bet, from them, which is what
oh,
makes it
I
all
learned
worthwhile.
Oh, I learned so much and I had so much fun. So much fun. Yeah. In fact, when I got married for the second time, a whole bunch of those ladies and a few of the men came to my hen party the night before I got married. We went to the local very smart hotel and had cocktails. And I just smiled to myself thinking, oh, and I thought you were all so boring at the beginning and actually you're fabulous. So um, yeah, so then I stopped work and had my daughter, and I desperately didn't want to go back to my well-paid job with cancer research. I wanted to be home with my baby because I was 43. I'd lost two children in the year before with miscarriages, and so I stayed at home for 4 months, and then my husband said, "Oh, we need more money. You need to get a job." So I ended up having other people's children at my house, looking after them. So doing like child minding. And that was, when I look back, I don't know how I managed, because sometimes I had five under 4-year-olds running around the house, which was quite a challenge. But we survived. I did that, I think, for 7 years altogether. And in between that time, we came and lived in New Zealand for a year because my husband was a teacher and he got a year's teaching exchange. So we basically swapped lives with a New Zealand teacher. He and his family moved into our house in England and we moved into their house here in New Zealand. So for a whole year, we lived like a proper Kiwi family, which was wonderful. Lucy was only 2, so it was the ideal time to do it.
Hmm.
And I just fell in love with New Zealand and desperately wanted to emigrate there and then. It took me 14 years to persuade him to get back here eventually. And in hindsight, I probably pushed it too much because after he left, he said, I didn't like living in New Zealand. I didn't ever really settle there. So I have to hold up my hand and say, probably I persuaded him to do something that he really didn't want to do. But anyway, it's easy to be wise in hindsight, isn't it?
Yes, always.
Yeah, and then so we went back after our year here. We went back to the UK and we set up a business training and assessing construction workers because the UK government realised that because they'd stopped formal apprenticeships some 20 odd years earlier, that there were now hundreds of thousands of men working on construction sites who had all the necessary skills but no paper qualifications. And so they wanted to redress that, but they realised that these men would not be willing to go back to college for 3 years to learn their trade that they could already do. So they started this fast track program and we used to go onto sites. We obviously, I had to get lots of qualifications and things to do it, trainers and assessors qualifications. But then we used to go onto sites and watch the men working, ask them loads of questions. We obviously had trade specific instructor assessors, and they could get that qualification that they would have taken 3 years to get going to college. They could then get it in a matter of 6 months or so just by being observed doing their job. So it was a really, really good system. And it was very rewarding for me personally because I used to go onto the sites and do the initial talks and whatever. And I've always liked men. I've always enjoyed their company. So I could cope with all the banter, you know, all the, "You all right, darling? What are you going to do after work?" That kind of thing.
Mm.
I enjoyed all that. The bit I hated was wearing a hard hat because they're very unflattering and they squash your hairdo. But the most rewarding thing for me, we did that business for 20 years. The most rewarding thing was when a guy who I'd met on site who didn't even want to do it because he felt inadequate, which I later discovered was because he couldn't read or write, but he'd hidden it from all his colleagues. The most satisfying thing was once he'd passed, which obviously he sailed through, I sent him his certificate in the post. And the next day he phoned me and he said, "Pat, thank you so much for that certificate." He said, "It's the only thing I've ever had in my whole life that says I'm good at anything." He said, "My wife is framing it and putting it on the living room wall." And that just made me cry because I thought this is a man who's 45, who's gone through his whole life thinking he's stupid. And suddenly just that one action can give him something to be proud of. So that was, I loved doing that. And that's how we made our money. For a few years, it was incredibly successful. And then it tailed off. And that's when we emigrated to New Zealand. And since I've been here, I've just basically been having a lovely time, doing a bit of voluntary work, lots of socializing and becoming an author. So
What attracted you to New Zealand? Why did you fall in love so much with New Zealand, do you think?
it's a hard question to answer, Michael. It was something deep inside me. After I'd been here for a year, or when I'd been here probably only for a few weeks, I got this real feeling deep inside me that I needed to be here. I
Hmm.
just think sometimes places in the world draw you in for
Hmm.
whatever reason. Who knows? You don't know if it's because perhaps you've got some association with it through an ancestor, or I don't know. But I felt very, very drawn to New Zealand. And once we went back to the UK, we were back there for 14 years. Whenever I spoke to friends from New Zealand, whenever they'd phone me, I would end up in tears for hours.
Hmm.
I want to go back to New Zealand. So it was a need rather than a desire, almost.
Hmm.
And it's not something I've ever regretted. Even after he abandoned me, we were back in England when he announced he didn't want to be married anymore, and he never came back to New Zealand. I just had to come back alone. Even then, my friends in England were saying to me, "Oh, Pat, just stay in England. You know, we're all here. We'll all be here for you." And I said, "No, no, home is just New Zealand." Even though I knew I was coming back all alone because Lucy was still living in London, I've got no family here. But there was something that pulled me back.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I understand that. I really enjoyed New Zealand a lot, and if there's when people ask me a place in the world that I regard as my favorite place to visit, New Zealand always comes out first. But
Yes.
I enjoy wherever I go. I actually took my first trip to London in late October of this year. I was only there for a couple of days, but it was to do a speech, and it was pretty similar to being here. It just
Yes.
wasn't the same feeling as being in New Zealand, which I had the opportunity to do, as I said before, for a little over 3 weeks. So it was really a lot of fun,
Mm.
and
I
the environment is just so different.
Yes, I think New Zealand, I think one of the, I mean, obviously it's an incredibly beautiful country, but I think one of the main differences is that we've got a landmass pretty similar to the UK, but
Hmm.
we've only got like 5 million people, and the UK's got more than 70 million. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. You know, the more people you try to cram into a small space, the more the social problems are enlarged, aren't they? We have exactly the same social problems here that are anywhere else in the world, but because our population is relatively small, it's not such a huge feature of life, I think.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I haven't explained to everyone listening that Pat and I met through the RV Book Festival, virtual book festival, which both of us being authors, we spoke at and participated in, gosh, a little over a month ago now.
Mm. Yes, time flies,
It
doesn't
does. It
it?
does. And one of the things that I said, as I usually do when I get a chance to meet with people, is we'd love to have you all come on the podcast. And Pat is the second of the three people who were there, and so I'm glad that we got to do this. But let's talk about you being an author. So you started being an author, what, just 3 years ago or 4 years ago?
Yes, yes, it's just,
And what? Yeah, go ahead.
oh no, sorry, you carry on.
Well, so what just caused you to decide that you were going to try to write a book?
Okay, well, when I was a little girl, I had a massive list of things I wanted to be when I was grown up. I wanted to be a nurse, a missionary, a writer, a teacher, a ballerina. They were all that was my list. So when I was about 8, I edited my first magazine. I have one limited copy of it. It was a very limited edition. It only lasted one time. But so I guess probably I've always had that desire deep inside me, but because of circumstances and not coming from, a very privileged background, it meant that I didn't have the opportunity. But in the days when we used to write letters, I always loved to write long, long letters to all my friends, my family. And when I lived in Fiji for 2 years, there was no other way of communicating with my
Mm-hmm.
parents. They had no telephone. So for 2 years, I wrote them letters. And when they died and I had to clear out their house, I found this enormous pile of blue airmail letters that I'd written to my parents over a 2 year period. They'd kept every single one. So I think I'd always loved writing, but it never occurred to me that I would ever have the chance to write a book. And then we get to COVID. And we here in New Zealand went into lockdown on the day of my 69th birthday. It was a beautifully sunny day, and I was all alone because Lucy was in England. And I made myself a chocolate brownie, stuck a candle in it, sat in the garden and cried because my marriage was over, my daughter was gone, we had COVID, there were lots of things to cry about. And I then spent the next 3 weeks lying on my sofa, watching rubbish on Netflix, eating too much chocolate and drinking too much red wine. And then I thought to myself, Pat, this is ridiculous. This could go on for a few more weeks, because at the time we thought COVID was going to be quite short-lived, didn't we? And I thought, why don't you do something practical? Why don't you write a book? So I just got out some paper and pen and started writing, and stayed up probably mostly day and night for 2 weeks. And then within 2 weeks, my first book, Daisy, was done. And that was that, really. The rest is history. Since then, I published it, self-published it just before my 70th birthday. And in the 3 years since then, I've written and published 8 more, contributed to 5 anthologies, written a little, yes. So yeah, I've written articles for magazines and been interviewed by lovely people like you. And the rest is history. Are you all right? Have I sent you to sleep talking?
No, um, I'm just listening. I didn't know whether you were done. It's, it's fascinating to listen to the story and to hear you talk about what brought you to it. What made you decide what kind of books to write?
I don't think I really did decide. My daughter, for my birthday, for the previous Christmas, had sent me a very dry little textbook, which she
Mm.
knew I would love, called, I can't think exactly what it's called, something like The History of Architecture of Council Houses in the UK. Something very boring like that.
Yeah.
And it was basically a textbook, because I love architecture as well. It was basically a textbook with just a few pictures in. So I'd kind of put it on my coffee table, but ignored it. You know how you do when there's books you
Hmm.
should read but you kind of don't get around to it. So at the beginning of COVID, I picked it up one day, or a couple of days before I started writing. I picked it up. And within 5 minutes, I was enthralled. I got out post-it notes. I'd stuck those all over little bits and written quotes. And I think that was kind of an inspiration. So I expected the book to be more about, more of a theme of architecture. And in fact, the book doesn't. There is one guy who becomes an architect in it towards the end, but I think that kind of just pushed something in my head into gear, because I firmly believe, Michael, I mean, they always say that everyone has a book inside them, and when I do my talks now, I'm often photographed at a very funny stage where I'm going like this, because I'm just saying how it feels as though somebody's taken off the top of my head and 70 years worth of words are just flying out, because I find writing incredibly easy. The first book, Daisy, wrote itself pretty much. I just kind of had an idea and I wrote down a few things about possible people, and then they just wrote their own story, really, which I know as an author you will understand that. And I would say for all my other books, I've had an idea, but they've kind of written themselves.
As well. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, you talk about textbooks. I've been an advocate for some time about the concept that people should rewrite textbooks or make textbooks different than they are. And technical manuals the same way. As you said, they're very boring. Yep. And they don't need to be. And textbooks could draw people in a lot more than they do. For example, my master's degree is in physics, and when you're looking at a physics textbook, there are lots of mathematical equations and so on, and that's fine. But think of how much more interesting the book might be, and think of how much more you might draw the interest of people to the science by including in the book some stories about the author, their I don't want to necessarily say adventures, but their experiences, why they became a physicist, why they do what they do, and bringing some humanity to the textbook, I think would make a significant difference to textbooks in general. But we don't see that because people just want to get the facts out there.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely, totally agree. When I was at school, I hated doing research because it was boring. You had to learn the names of all the kings of England and Henry VIII's wives and when their heads got chopped off and all that stuff. And apart from the really scandalous bits, I wasn't really interested. But now I absolutely adore research. I discovered that my first book, Daisy, is a historical fiction. And so I had to do lots of research to make sure it was accurate, because if you write something in a book and it's not right, people are going to pick holes in it. I mean, they're going to pick holes in your work anyway, so you don't want to give them extra ammunition.
Right.
But I discovered that I absolutely loved doing research. And of course, these days it's so easy because you just click a button on your computer and you can find out what coal scuttles were used in 1871. Whereas in my youth, we had to trudge to the library, get out all the encyclopedias. And so I've discovered that love of research, all my novels are now historical, because it gives me an excuse to go researching and finding out stuff. So it's opened up a whole new world to me, Michael. And I just realize now that expression, education is wasted on the young, is so true, because now in my 70s, I am so open to learning new things. Whereas in my teens, I was bored to death and just wanted to go home and play.
So what was Daisy about?
Oh, well, Daisy, I'll just read you a little bit on the back to give you an idea. Daisy is a gentle family saga spanning almost 100 years, from 1887 to 1974. It is set in Alabama, Harlem, and London, and incorporates some of the evils of society, poverty, racism, and snobbery, as well as some of the greatest that life has to offer: family, friendship, and love. And a couple of quotes. Being born poor was a scar that never faded. And she had never experienced racial hatred firsthand, so had no real idea of how it could erode a person's whole life. So basically, it's just a story of a young woman born in the slums of London and a young man born into an affluent lifestyle on an Alabama plantation in 1871, and how their lives interwove. They never got together, but all their extended people did. So it's
Right.
just, yeah.
Right. Well, the the thing about that kind of a story is, again, it draws you in.
Mm,
Um, I I would say something slightly different. Being poor is a scar that never fades. On the other hand, being poor also gave you, or would give Daisy, the life that she had, which
mm.
was so, I would suspect, so very invaluable to her overall life experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And her life changes quite dramatically midway because of the people she meets. Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I reread it and I just think, wow, this is quite a good story. And then I feel bad for thinking that about my own writing. But I've written the second Daisy, which is obviously the follow-up. And then I thought, actually, and then I wrote a little travel book and my life story and whatever. And then I thought, oh, I really miss doing research. Perhaps I could write about my own family, my own ancestors. So
Mm,
I then wrote the Ancestors series. I've done three in it, and wrote about my paternal grandparents, my maternal grandparents, and my own parents. I've just published that book about them. That was glorious, but very emotive because obviously I knew certain bits about them, but delving back further and further into the family histories, you discover lots of things. And very emotional to write,
yeah.
but particularly one about my parents, because your parents are just your mum and dad, aren't they? You kind of don't think of them really as people in their own right. But when you start writing their life story, you're living life through their shoes, and it made me very emotional. I cried every day writing my parents' story, but now I'm really glad I did it because it's kind of honored their lives, and also it means they'll never die. Even their photographs are on the cover. um, and my daughter said that she cried all the way reading it.
Right.
And she said, Mum, it was wonderful because I hardly knew them. They died when she was quite young.
Yeah.
She said, but now I understand. Yeah, so because she's had a reasonably nice upbringing. She hasn't had the upbringing that they had or even I had. So yeah, I think I've become a bit of a pain now because everyone I meet, I say, like last week, I did a talk at the local genealogy society, and I said to them, please write your story down or
Yeah.
record it in some way because once you die, your story dies with you. No one knows your life as well as you do. Um, so yeah, but I just love research. So now I'm thinking, oh, what else can I write about and do some research? I write about people, Michael. People are my passion. I love people and ordinary people. I don't need to write about,
Right.
wealthy, famous people.
Right. But
Yeah.
the other part about it is that you got, as you write about your parents, I'll bet you got to know them better too.
Oh,
And it helps you understand the kind of life you had and they had. And I still bet overall, you could talk about wealth and all that, but you wouldn't trade your life for anything because it made you who you are today.
you're absolutely right. And yes, you're right. Writing about their stories and all that they went through, it was, yeah, it just made me really, really realize that they were even more special people than I knew they were. But no, I wouldn't trade anything. I mean, I had a wonderfully happy childhood. If you put aside that silly bit of bullying that, I
Yeah.
contended with over the years. But yeah, because I didn't know really that I got snippets of there being other kind of lives. Like, I had rich friends who had lots of
Hmm.
clothes, traveling all the time and stuff. But basically, my life was just my little nuclear family we had a little two-bedroom house for six of us. And that was my life. We were very happy. There were very rarely raised voices. And that's why I didn't cope very well in my first marriage when my first husband suddenly showed me that he had a rather violent temper
Mm.
because I didn't know how to handle it because I had never experienced that before in my whole life.
Right.
So in that way, I wasn't prepared. But yeah, I will always be grateful to my parents because with very little, they gave us all a very happy childhood. Mm.
Well, so you started writing at the age of 70. Do you wish that you had started writing earlier, or do you think about that?
I think about it. I don't really, because I think I had to live through everything I've lived through,
Hmm.
to get to the point now of being able to write in the way I do. Um, and also, yeah, no, I don't really. I mean, the only thing I think is, oh, I hope I don't die before I get everything written I want to write. That's my only thing.
Hmm.
But no, I don't. I've learnt, Michael, not to regret anything in life because if you do, the only person it hurts is yourself.
Yeah, because you are who you are because of your life.
Exactly. Exactly. And you would understand that better than most. I mean, you cope so
Hmm.
well with being blind, which is absolutely remarkable because most of us, if we suddenly can't see and need to wear a stronger pair of glasses, we just go down into a depressive state. So you're a wonderful beacon of hope, I think, for an awful lot of people.
Of course, the issue, and using that as an example, the issue is that you don't know anything about being blind or blindness, and people generally don't, and they make a lot of assumptions that are not necessarily true. But it is, again, the lives that they live. And the reality is, there's nothing wrong with being blind. We
Mm,
live in a world where most people are light dependent, that is, they can see. But the reality is, of course, in the perspective I try to oftentimes nowadays to convey to people is light dependence is just as much a disability as being light independent or blind, because as soon as the lights go out, you lose power. And if you don't have an immediate light source, you're in a world of hurt. And we really should think of disability as a characteristic that everyone has, except it manifests itself differently for different people. But unfortunately, people aren't ready to do that. And the reason for bringing up the concept in that way is that I think that because disability is really a characteristic everyone has, it is also a way to help level the playing field. And that's something that is so hard to get people to do because they really think, well, you're blind, you're not as good as I.
mm. Oh, wow, very profound. I love talking to you, Michael. This is fascinating stuff. Fascinating. I had a little niece. Sadly, she died when she was 14. She had a dreadful genetic disease called Batten's, but she went blind for the last couple of
Mm.
years. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart, but she seemed to just deal with it somehow. I guess we all get the strengths we need at the times we need them, do you think?
I think that's true, or we can, as long as we accept it. But the reality is that, of course, she lost her eyesight. But if she developed an attitude that I have other things that are available to me, so I'm going to be fine,
Mm.
then she would be fine.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, sadly, she lost all her faculties. She couldn't
Yeah.
walk, she couldn't talk. So everything went. But it was when her eyes went and she was still able to understand. That was the hardest thing. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I remember years ago when I worked in Barclays Bank when I was quite in my 20s, and I worked in a big branch at the time, and we had a blind telephonist because in those days, back in the 60s, I think it was kind of what they did. It was when there were all those great big telephonic boards,
Hmm.
press all the buttons. And we had a guy called Peter, and his dog was called Penny. And our branch was on the corner of this huge, wide road in a place called Kingston, just outside London. And to cross the road, there were like 6 lanes of traffic, and it was really, really dangerous. And we would come out of work in the afternoon, and we'd all be standing there hesitant to cross the road. And Peter would suddenly just march across the road with Penny, and we'd all be standing there in awe. And one day I got brave and I crossed over with him. And we got to the other side, and I said, Peter, how can you do that? He said, oh, well, he said, it's always useful being blind because traffic feels sorry for you. So they all kind of slow down anyway. He said, but Penny leads me. He said, she just knows it's fine. So the dog just takes me over. And I was fascinated, but he had just recently married about 2 years earlier. He'd been fully sighted till he was 11, and then he and some friends were messing about on the railway lines, and he fell over and bashed his
Hmm.
head on he went blind. So he had been sighted, and but now he was married. He had a little baby, and I said, "Oh, Peter, can you actually see your baby, or do you just have to feel the outline?" He said, "Oh no," he said, "I got a tiny, tiny bit of vision." He said, "So I can see the shape of the baby." And I just always remember thinking, "You're so brave." That was what I thought. I just felt he was so brave,
Well, just
and
remember the
that's how I feel
dictionary.
with you. You know?
Well, just
Yeah.
remember the dictionary defines to see as to perceive. It doesn't necessarily need to be with the eyes. And there's so many other senses that give us this a lot of information as well. For
Mm,
me, I don't want my dog to decide when we cross the street in general, unless the
right.
dog refuses to go because there's a hybrid car or something coming that I don't hear. But it's
Yeah.
my job to know when to go. And
Right.
and I know how to do that. And so I can listen for the traffic flow and go accordingly. And at the same time, if I then tell the dog to go forward and the dog won't go, my immediate assumption is there's a reason for that. And and usually there is, because the dog and I have developed that kind of a relationship where the dog knows it's my job to tell the dog where to go, and it's the dog's job to make sure that we get there safely. It's a very close knit team. It's as close knit of a team as you can imagine. Um,
Mm.
and it's what it's really all about. So the dog and I each do our jobs, and when we do them correctly together, what a wonderful world it becomes.
Fabulous. And it obviously works because you're still standing. You're still here.
I'm
So
still here, and my dog is over here breathing very deeply asleep. But
oh,
so you stick with historical fiction. Have you ever thought of writing other kinds of books like adventures or novels or that are not historic in nature,
um,
fantasy or any of those?
I don't think I've got the right brain set to do fantasy or horror or
Hmm.
crime. Um, I, I'm writing historical because I've discovered a great love for it, but I also have a great love for travel. So I wrote a little travel book, and I've just done a big trip. So I'm going to write another travel book because that's another great love.
Ooh.
I wrote my memoirs, which was very satisfying, to write my own story down so it's there
Hmm.
forever, if you like. And I also wrote a little book called The Abandoned Wives Handbook, which I didn't want to write. I just kept putting it off. And then one day I woke up at 3 in the morning and this voice saying to me, Pat, you have to write this book to help other people. So I just wrote this. I cried all the time writing it. As you probably deduced, I'm a great crier. I think crying is the best way of getting stress out of your system, out of my system. So I wrote this book. It's just a tiny little book that you can pop into a handbag, called The Abandoned Wives Handbook. And I've just made it like a little dictionary. I call it a dictionary of distress. And it's I'll just briefly read you the back so you'll understand. The pain of abandonment is huge. The partner you loved and cherished for so many years has decided you are no longer required, past your sell by date, of no use to them anymore, so tossed out like a piece of garbage, abandoned with barely a backward glance. In an attempt to keep this a gentle, light-hearted read, each chapter is divided into letters of the alphabet, rather like a dictionary of distress, something you can dip into at any time. I am not an expert, merely someone who has survived one of life's great traumas and has come through it as a stronger, more resilient person. So I didn't want to write it. I hated doing it. I published it, and it's ironically one of my best-selling books. People
Do you
buy it all the time.
do you publish your own books, or do you have a publisher?
I have I have done till this point, Michael, simply because I feel I'm too old to hang around waiting to get noticed.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have just finished another book, which I I just feel might be slightly more commercial, so I may try seeing if I can get an agent for that. But I will probably only try one or two, and then if they say no, I'll just give up and self-publish. The only thing against self-publishing for me now is that because I want to do it properly, I pay an editor, I pay a cover designer, I pay a formatter. It becomes quite expensive to pay
Hmm.
all these people. So that's my only downside. But I do like to be totally in control. I can choose my own covers, I can choose when it's published, I can choose what the content is. And if you go with a traditional publisher, you often lose the
Hmm.
ability to have the same control.
Well, or you negotiate, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. I also have to say I understand fully this whole concept of abandonment. When my seventh guide dog, Africa, retired, and she retired because she wasn't seeing well and she was slowing down, so I knew it was time to get a new guide dog. So it was
Mm,
February 9th of 2018, and we lived here, and her puppy raiser, the people who raised her, they call them, I think, in New Zealand, puppy walkers, but they live about 140 miles south or about 120 miles in a town called Carlsbad. And they came, and I said that they could have Africa, and the only reason I gave her up was because we already had my wife's service dog and a cat, and I was going to get another dog, and Karen wasn't really going to be able to handle taking care of two dogs and a cat when I traveled to speak. So
mm.
we agreed that Africa could go live with Bill and Peggy, and they came and picked her up, and she walked out the door without a backward glance. I was abandoned.
Oh, that's awful.
I, yeah, well, we went down and visited her several times. She was just excited. No,
Right.
she was a great dog, and
Yes. Yeah.
and they got to have her for 2 years before she passed. But she was a good dog, and she had a good life, and I can't complain a bit. But it's fun to tease about how obviously we have abandoning issues here.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the secret in life, Michael, to always find something to be happy about and smile about. Because life can be very tough, can't it? I mean, yeah, life is tough. And so I think if we don't try and seek a little joy, we might as well all give up, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
and there's no need to do that. I mean, God put us on this earth to live an adventure, and life is an adventure,
Yes,
no,
absolutely. I
no
couldn't agree
matter
more.
what we do.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, how do you develop your characters? I mean, you're writing historical fiction, so you're using history and periods of time as the setting for your books, but you're creating your own characters primarily, I gather.
Yes, yes. To be honest, in my head, when I start writing, I almost have an exact picture of my characters. I know exactly what they look like. I mean, if I was to suddenly get a film offer, I could easily say how these people should look, because they're real. For example, a few months after oh no, maybe a year or so after I published Daisy, I was talking to my daughter one day and I just said, "Oh, do you remember when Theo did whatever?" And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "Mum, I don't know your characters as well as you do." And we both burst out laughing because to me, they're real people.
Yeah,
I can picture them. I know exactly what they look like. And I think even when I start a new book in my head, I already know what my characters look like. They may not, as the plot goes on, behave in the way I want them to, but I know who they are. I know how they look. Yeah.
they're going to write the book and they're going to tell you what you need to
Totally.
do. Yeah,
Totally.
but you
Yeah.
use but you use, I assume, real places in your books.
I always use real places, always, yeah. And always places I know, because I think you can write more authentically then. Like in Daisy, I wrote about Harlem and Alabama and New York and London. Or not New York in that one, but London. And because I know all those places, I've been there and, they're familiar to me. Yeah.
Yeah, so you you let them do what they do, and
Yep.
out comes the book.
Absolutely, that's right. Yes, yeah,
Have you
yeah.
written any yet in New Zealand?
You mean based in New Zealand?
But
No,
yeah.
I haven't. The funny thing is, Michael, being an immigrant is, and I have spoken to lots of other immigrants about this. Um, in fact, I co-authored a book in lockdown called The Warrior Women Project, a sisterhood of immigrant women, which is based in the States, and all the other women are living in the States except me. And I caught up with them when I came over to the States a couple of months ago. We had a reunion, met for the first time, which was wonderful. But we all said, once you are an immigrant, you never truly belong anywhere. You
Hmm.
know, when I go, I always feel a little bit of an outsider here. I've been here 14 years now, and that's nothing anybody does. That's just my feeling deep inside. I go back to England and I feel like an outsider. I
Hmm.
used to live in Fiji when I was in my 20s, and then I had a house there until my divorce. I go back there, and I've got a lot of extended friend family there. I go back there and I always feel like a bit of an outsider. So I think that's the price you pay for wanting a life less ordinary. You somehow become like a little bit of a floating
Yeah.
person. And to answer your question, I don't really feel qualified to write about New Zealand. Obviously, I talk about it in my travel book and I talk about different places, but to base a whole story here, I don't feel qualified. There are enough fabulous New Zealand authors who are doing that already, who've been born here, who understand the country, yeah, they're
Well,
just more
at the
than me.
same time, you wrote Daisy, which took place in part in Alabama. And how much time did you
Exactly.
spend? So,
Yeah,
but
I know.
it may be something in the future where a character will pop out and say, "I want to be in New Zealand," but that's something to look at.
Yes, I love it when somebody like you calls me out on my own things because you're absolutely right. That was a silly argument to say I don't know it enough. So thank you for that. You've made me rethink. That's good.
Well, so I gather that when you're writing, you think you have the plot planned out, or you try to have the plot planned out, but it doesn't necessarily go the way you plan it, does it?
No, not at all. I mean, I know roughly what I want to say. I think what I definitely know what I want to do is get certain little messages across.
Hmm.
And that doesn't matter what my characters do because I can weave that in. Like in Daisy, I wanted to get across that slavery was dreadful, racism's dreadful, and the way black people were treated when they went to England in the 1950s was dreadful. So I managed to, and that snobbishness and stuff is dreadful. So I managed to always weave those kind of themes into my books. And apparently, it has been said by reviewers that I do it so well that it just makes people think about how they think,
There you
what they.
go. Yeah.
So, so those main themes, if you like, I manage to weave into my stories, regardless of how badly my characters behave.
So when you're writing, are you pretty disciplined? Do you have certain times that you write, or do you just sit down and write till you're ready to stop for the day, or what?
I am very non-disciplined, undisciplined, whatever the term is supposed to be.
Yeah.
I have great intentions. I think, right, I'm going to spend tomorrow writing. I'll be at my desk by 8 o'clock and I'll sit there till 5.
Hmm.
And then at 9 o'clock, I get up to go and make a cup of coffee. And at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I'm out weeding the garden. And then I might come back in and do a little bit, and then I go off and do something else. So I am dreadfully undisciplined, but I work really well to deadlines. Just before I went away on my big trip in September, I was partway through a book, probably a third way through writing a new book. And I woke up one day and I thought, right, I'm going to get that book finished before I go. I had 3 weeks left. In that 3 weeks, I had masses of appointments. I had to sort out my wardrobe, which as a woman is a huge problem, one that you've probably never had. But you have to decide what goes with what and how many dresses you should take. And it's a huge issue for a lot of women. So I had a lot of jobs to do in that 3 weeks. Instead of which I decided to set myself this
Yeah.
self-imposed deadline to get the book finished. Crazy. I
And
mean, why? Crazy. Um,
and did you?
the day before.
There you are.
I was so proud of myself because that was it. I decided, and what I did to make myself accountable, I actually put a post on Facebook and Instagram saying, why, and all these little yellow post-it notes, and I'd written on their pack suitcase, do this, do this, do this. And so I just said to everyone that I'd given myself this self-appointed deadline. So I had made myself publicly accountable. If I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have finished it. But I find for me, that's the best way of disciplining myself, is to have a deadline, with everything in life, really. Yeah.
But the other part about it is, even when you're, as you would put it, being undisciplined, your brain is still working on the book and the characters are mulling
Yes.
things over. So it does pop out.
Oh, totally, totally. And I end up with lots of little scrappy notes all over the house, where I've just grabbed a piece of paper and written down something. And then, of course, I have to gather them all together. And when I was in the States recently, I spent 2 months, and I've got I was doing a lot of research, and I've got scrappy notes everywhere. So I've now got to try and pull those all together while my brain still remembers what they were meant to be. Like Lady in Red Dress in New Orleans. Well, what does that really mean? So
Right.
I'm my own worst enemy in many ways, but
But you
but
know it, and so you work through it.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So that's okay. Where did you travel in September?
I went to Atlanta first to meet up with these warrior women, which was truly fabulous. Then I went to New Orleans.
Ah.
And my friend who lives in Alabama picked me up, and we went to New Orleans. And then we drove back to Alabama. She lives in Huntsville.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there for a week and was doing lots of research because Daisy is partly based there.
Right.
Um, and then she drove me back to Nashville, and I flew to New York, where I was meeting some friends from New Zealand, who live there 6 months of the year. So I spent 6 days there and went to Harlem for more research and stuff like that. And then flew to Canada, to Toronto, where two friends, a lady I'd met when we had our daughters together, and her daughter, they now live in France. They flew from France, met me in Toronto. We hired the biggest SUV I've ever seen in my life, and we drove across Canada for 3 weeks, which was such fun, such fun. And then I came home. So I've got millions of scrappy notes that I need to pull together to write a travel book and to use as inspiration for my novels.
So so you're going to write another travel book.
I am going to write another travel book. Yeah. Yeah.
And the Abandoned Wives Handbook, that's kind of a self-help book.
That's a self-help book.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Do
Just
you
a
think
little
you'll
one.
write another one of those?
No, I'm done with that.
One's enough of those, huh?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not an expert, Michael, and but the funny thing is, when I do talks, I always talk about all my books. And a few weeks ago, I was talking at this very smart meeting of ex-business people, both ladies and gentlemen, and they were all over 60. So quite a conservative audience. And at the end, or towards the end, I just mentioned this Abandoned Wives book. I tend to skim over it. I don't really talk about it too much, unless the audience is particularly relevant. But I just said to them, "Oh, and this is my little book." And someone said, "Oh, well, could you read us an excerpt from it?" So I said, "Okay, I'll just open the book at random." And I opened the book, and the title, what you won't be able to see here, the title of that chapter was K for Kill. And I thought, no, I don't want to read about kill in front of this audience. So I just made a joke of it. And I'll just read it to you because it will make you laugh. As I have said previously, under section indecisive, you may, in your darkest moments, think about hurting him. This is not really a great idea, as you would undoubtedly be caught and end up in prison.
Yeah.
So, I and then I went on a bit more, but it's yeah, no, I'm done with that book. I've done my bit for humanity with that. It seems to be helping a lot of people, so that's enough. Yeah.
I would never make a good criminal because I know I'd be caught, and I don't know how to
Yeah.
keep from getting caught, and frankly, don't care about trying to worry about getting caught or not getting caught. It's easier just not to be a criminal, so it works out fine for
Yes,
me.
exactly. Yeah, me too. Me too.
So
I'm
much
saying.
easier. So much easier.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Well, if people want to reach out to you and maybe learn a little bit more about you or meet you, how do they do that?
Okay, well, my website is just patbackley.com, so it's very easy.
Can you spell that, please?
Yes, of course. Backley.com.
.com.
Yeah. And I'm on all the channels as, Facebook and Instagram and X and LinkedIn and stuff as Pat Backley author, or Pat Backley books. And my books are all available from Amazon, all the online retailers, Barnes and Noble, stuff like that, as ebooks or paperbacks. Or if someone desperately wanted a signed copy, I'm very happy to send them a signed copy. And you can request them from libraries.
Have you thought about making any of them come out in an
Audio.
audio format?
I have. A few people have suggested that this year when I've been doing talks, they've come up to me afterwards. And yes, I think I'm going to, as long as it's not too costly, because at the moment my budget is extremely limited. But I'm going to do them myself because everyone feels that my books will come across better in my own voice. So.
Well, and you read well. So I think that makes a lot of sense to consider.
Thank you, Michael. That's very kind of you.
Well, Pat, this has been fun and I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot of things as well. And I'm glad that we've had this chance and we need to do it again. When are you going to start a podcast?
Well, funny you should say that. I've decided I'm going to.
Good for you.
I'm going to just dip my toes in very gently. I'm going to start it in the new year and I'm going to call it, and this makes everyone who knows me laugh, I'm going to call it Just 10 Minutes with Pat Backley. And everyone has said, oh, don't be ridiculous, Pat.
Yeah, I agree.
10 minutes. But I thought it's a way of just gently edging in. And then if people enjoy listening to me, they might want to listen for longer after a while. But I thought initially just 10 minutes, little snippets. If they like what they hear, they might come back.
They'll come back.
Oh,
And, I don't think there would be a problem. Well, if you ever need a guest to come and spend at least 10 minutes, just let me know.
I certainly shall. I have absolutely loved talking to you, Michael. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a very joyful morning. I've really loved it. Thank you.
Well, this has been fun, and I want to thank all of you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And reach out to Pat. I'm sure she would love to communicate with you, and maybe in some way you'll end up in a book, which is always a nice, good thing to think about as well. I'd love to hear what you think about our podcast today, so please feel free to email me, Michael, Michaelhelhi, at accessibe, accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, which is at www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And Michael Hingson is spelled MichaelHingson.com/podcast. Wherever you're listening, we would really appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating. And we value that. We value your thoughts and input. Pat, for you and all of you listening, if you know anyone who ought to be a guest, who you think would have a story that we ought to hear and talk about, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love an introduction. We're always looking for people to come on Unstoppable Mindset, because our job is to talk with people, let them tell their stories, to show all of us that in reality, we all are more unstoppable than we think we are. And that's the way it really ought to be. So hope that you will consider doing that. And we hope that you'll listen to more episodes of Unstoppable Mindset going forward. And Pat, again, I want to thank you for being here. This has absolutely been fun and enjoyable. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I have absolutely loved it. And I would love to come back on sometime. Thank you.